Looks like it worked. Is that defaulting back to myself when we're doing the presentation, or is everyone able to see the PowerPoint? Okay. So this is the summer 2020 capital funding update for the Roberts Creek cohousing wastewater treatment service area. This is a map of the service area. If you reside outside of this boundary, there's a good chance that this meeting doesn't apply to you this evening. We'll be getting to all 15 of the wastewater service areas over the course of the next month, and hopefully we can talk to you when it's your turn. Today, we're going to be talking about the summary of what we've reviewed previously. We're going to go over a capital funding update, and we'll talk about what's coming up next with the wastewater service funding, and we'll take some questions at the end of the show. So just a quick summary of what's been done in the past. This process started with a wastewater service review, which was a high-level review of all wastewater services that we deliver here on the Sunshine Coast Regional District. We followed that up by delving into the specifics of each wastewater service. And then we went out and we engaged with the community, which you might remember from last December. We were at the community building there at the Roberts Creek cohousing. We took the information and the feedback we received from residents, and we revised our budget models and presented to the board a suggested rate adjustment, which was then adopted last March, I believe. Some of the key findings coming out of that 2019 wastewater service review was that the existing revenue of most of the wastewater service areas was unsustainable. We found that the operations budget exceeded the revenues, and that because of that, the contribution to reserve funds were frequently deferred. Key point is that future capital expenditures were not planned for. The ratio of capital reserves to the future capital expenses was too low. Just a recap of how the funding model worked previously. Frontage fees were collected from every parcel in the service area, and user fees were collected from every parcel that was connected to the wastewater service. These fees combined to form the operating budget, which then was used to fund the annual expenditures of operations and capital expenses and to build the capital and operating reserves. Coming out of that review, some of the outcomes were that we're able to decouple this user fee and frontage fee funding model so that each fee specifically was used for one purpose. User fees were used only to fund operation and maintenance expenses, and now frontage fees only fund capital expenses. Another outcome was after we conducted an extensive review of the operation and maintenance requirements and audited the activities, we were able to revise the operation and maintenance budget to ensure that there was adequate funding for the necessary maintenance activities. It was important for some of the wastewater service areas to establish minimum reserve targets, and this process will continue annually as we review the operations budget to make sure we collect the appropriate amount of revenue to ensure we can provide a sustainable service. Finally, we developed a capital funding model to help plan for future expenses. What's on your screen now is the outcome of the decoupling of the user and frontage fees. We now have two parallel revenue streams that allow for greater transparency and understanding of how our revenues and our expenses marry. A common question we received after our engagement sessions last year was, why do we need an operating reserve? And that's a fair question. It's important that everyone understands that unforeseen repairs can exceed the annual operating budget. And due to the nature of working in a regional district, we're not able to borrow for these operational expenses. So therefore, it's important to have an operating reserve. And it's important to know that your operating reserves are only withdrawn for work that's done within your service area. Continuing on with the summary of what happened from the previous review, this was the impact on your wastewater service rates. The Roberts Creek cohousing wastewater operations and maintenance budget after the audit was increased by 16%. Your user fee increased from $562.50 to $687.97. Your frontage fee was unchanged, and your total increase was $125.47 from 2019 to 2020. During this process, we got a lot of feedback from residents, and we did the best we could to listen to resident feedback. We took some criticisms of our approach, and we reduced some of our engineering allowance estimates. We reduced the contingency we thought was necessary for future expenses. We appreciated that the residents had a higher tolerance for debt than we might have considered originally. And we also heard that the uncertainty of increasing rates was causing stress on the residents. And so we've created a proposal that we will put forward to the board of a 5-year rate structure. This rate structure will be revised annually, and it should provide residents with advance notice of what their rates will be. Furthermore, this year we updated the saving and borrowing rates to make sure we're up to date with the most current rates. We've also introduced a variable borrowing rate to reflect that different terms of different loans have different rates. We also applied a variable construction cost index to better reflect that construction inflation rate over time. This means if a project is closer in the future, it has a different rate than one that's later. So we're going to get into the infrastructure funding aspect of this presentation. And just to review some of the factors that go into this process, there's a series of provincial legislation, mostly within the Local Government Act, which defines the rules that regional districts must follow when providing services to residents. And the important one that we can dial out of this is that local service areas can be only funded by the participants, which means the costs are shared by a small number of people. Also, as everyone knows, infrastructure degrades over time. You have reduced performance and higher maintenance costs as things get older. And also, again, infrastructure costs consistently inflate over time. So this is the method we took when we developed our capital funding plan. We looked at the expenditures, developing a timeline of the anticipated replacement costs, using the estimated useful life of infrastructure. We used the most recent replacement costs for similar infrastructure. If we replaced a plant more recently than the latest estimate for your specific plant, we would use the closest values we could. We inflated all costs to future values using these construction cost indexes that were built from historical data from one of the leading construction estimating softwares that was available. And we included debt financing costs. And then when we considered revenue, we made sure we applied the interest accrual over time. I think it's important to highlight the fact that we use the most recent replacement costs to try to reduce areas where we're inflating old estimates more than necessary. Just a reminder, if you joined us for the first meeting, you may remember, but there's 3 main components within your wastewater service. There's the treatment plant, the disposal system, and the collection system, and they have different estimated useful lives. The lifespans are quite long though, and so it does make planning for capital replacement a little bit of a challenge. Just gonna walk you through a little bit of the process. Initially, we looked at the 30-year anticipated capital expenditures, and this is what you see here in front of you. In 2028, we have a sand filter that needs to be replaced, and coming up in 2043 approximately, there's a disposal field. And these expenses seem pretty minor considering things. And when we look at the historical rate increase for this Roberts Creek cohousing, which is about $6.50 a year when you average it across the existence of this service, what you see on your screen now is the projected reserve balance over the next 30 years. And that actually looks pretty good. You know, we can afford that disposal field in 2048 and everything's looking okay. And then if we expand the horizon that we're looking at out to 50 years, we have a huge expense that looms just outside the 30-year horizon, and that is the treatment plant, which will be need to replaced. We take a look at that reserve balance that we projected using the historical fee increase, and we can see that we run into trouble pretty quickly. And if we plotted what the historical fees have been up until that point, you can see there is a major jump projected for 2053. And that is where we have a loan payment due to finance the balance of the infrastructure costs that aren't funded by reserves. Now that sort of jump in fee increase is not really a sustainable financial way to plan for things. And it's definitely not equitable to future residents with this sort of infrastructure. If we expand the horizon out even further, you start gathering a lot of infrastructure, which costs are inflated quite a bit, and it's difficult to be certain of these costs. But it is important to be aware that these costs will be there when considering which plan is most appropriate. At the end of 50 years, which is going to be in 2070, it's probably important to have a little bit of reserve existing in this range here. But we're not going to look at a 75-year anticipated capital expenditure. We feel that 50 years is probably the right range. So I'd like to introduce a few of the plans we've looked at. Now, over the last 6 to 8 months, we've considered a myriad of plans, and they generally boil down to 3 different styles of looking at how to pay for this infrastructure. The first plan reflects what we discussed at our original meeting, and there was a sense from the Roberts Creek cohousing that maybe saving for the entire price of the capital expenditures was the preferred way to go. And so we thought we'd present that option first. Under this model, we look at $100 a year increase in your frontage fees from the year 2028 to the year 2020, from the year 2020 to the year 2028. And beyond that, we look at an inflationary increase of 2% for the rest of 50 years. That 2% increase is reflective of what the consumer price index inflates at on average, and it is a way to maintain an equitable payment as the costs go forward instead of a level price. In this plan, we have minimal debt. And you can see as I plot the reserve balance on that would be tracking along with these user fees, that as you get to that treatment plant in 2053, you've saved up enough that there is no impact on the small amount of debt that would be acquired there. The frontage fee that exists at that point can accommodate that debt. So next plan we're going to look at here, plan number 2. This one ramps up a little bit quickly in the early years. We have a 3-year increase of $200 a year. So from 2020 to 2022, we go from $204 to $604 annually, beyond which there's a 3% annual increase for the rest of the plan. Under this scenario, we do not build as much of a reserve balance at the year 2053, but it's sufficient that there is no impact on the user fees when we consider the debt that we take on at that point and the debt payments associated with it. So this plan also leaves us with a reasonable amount of reserves, but as those next set of costs come into the horizon, it might need adjustment to accommodate for them as we dial in the numbers. The third plan that we looked at took a little bit of a more casual approach to the increase in the early years, with $50 a year for the next 8 years from 2020 to 2028, and then 2% increase beyond that. As in the existing scenario where the frontage fee is $6.50 increase every year, there is a jump when the debt is accrued in 2053 of almost double the frontage fee price. This is not ideal. I don't think that I feel as a future resident, I would affect my decisions. But this is what it would look like with the reserve balance. We would have enough for the sand filter, for the disposal field, and we'd be borrowing about half of the price of the treatment plant. And the reserves built into the year 2070 are quite low. So I hope that wasn't too overwhelming for everyone. I just want to mention now, I probably should have mentioned earlier, this presentation will be up on YouTube, so you can take a pause if you need to look at those graphs in more detail and review these numbers. So this slide here is just the 3 plans I presented, the frontage fees across the next 50 years. And as you can see, plan number 1 was the green one, plan number 2 is the purple, and the alternative plan number 3 would be the red one. We're going to ask you here pretty soon which one appeals to you the most. I just want to give you a concrete idea. When we talk about a 5-year rate structure, what that would look like for these 3 plans. So this is a chart which shows the total costs associated with wastewater service at the Roberts Creek cohousing for the next 5 years. The user fee column on the left in black remains static. That's subject to an annual review, and it could go up and down depending on how much expenditure we have with maintenance and operation at the plant. The 3 colored columns show the frontage fees in bold, and then the total combined user fee and frontage fee beside it. As you can see, the purple one accelerates the most quickly, and the red the most slowly. So at this point, I'm just going to put a poll up on the screen for everyone to do. Oh. Wow, a lot of planned ones. Give another 30 seconds if anyone wants to vote on this plans. Okay, so moving on. Coming up, we look at finalizing these capital funding models to the point we can present to the board. We will present these 5-year rate structures for board consideration, where they will weigh what options they feel are best and if they think we should make any changes. And we'll continue to review the O&M budget as part of the annual process to evaluate how the current revenue matches with expenditures. And in conclusion, the rates we have set are currently not financially sustainable. We have upcoming capital expenditures which will outstrip the revenue. There are multiple ways to finance the 50-year capital expenditures, and we have choices to make with that. And the annual review we conduct with this will ensure that we maintain our information up to date, and we're on top of this for the future. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for any questions. See if I can. So if you have a question, please raise your hand in Zoom and we'll get to you. I'm not seeing anything from anyone. If anyone wants me to go back so they can review some slides or anything, I'd be happy to. There's a question there. I believe it's 31. So Steve asked how many co-housing participants there are. I assume you mean in your service area, and there's 31 in there. I believe there's 5 in the meeting currently. Oh, there you go. I hope I answered both parts of that question. Okay, we're not getting any questions. If there's any comments or anything, you can. Oh. There you go. There's the poll results. Okay, I hope everyone found this helpful. You can find a copy of this presentation on YouTube. That link will be on the Roberts Creek cohousing webpage. And if you have any further questions, you can email us at info@scrd.ca. Thank you for your time, and I hope everyone has a great evening. Oh, who was it? Oh, I said allowed to talk.
Can you hear me, Kyle?
I think I can, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. I found it very, very clear.
Okay.
And I'm not surprised that the number one option was probably fully accepted. I guess, you know, as we go along, there's be ways of maybe how to deal with the different how I say financially capable that people are from throughout the community. Some people, the cost would not be any sort of problem at all, but for others it might be somewhat difficult. And I know there has been talk about perhaps deferral of payment plans and so on and so forth, but those are things that we could probably discuss at a later date. But thank you once again, it was great.
Awesome, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great evening.